Kent in the UK is the location of New Ash Green, a post-war development known for its strong community spirit and sense of belonging. Among its residents was Sarah Walgreen, a 46-year-old who had a close-knit family that frequently gathered for lunch, shopping, and vacations. Her mother, and noted that Sarah had a deep concern for others and always defended the underdog. Sarah was a dedicated mother to her 5 children, who were the focal point of her life. She made special efforts for birthdays and holidays. Her 2 sons, Jack and Lewis, were from a previous relationship, and she had 3 more children with her partner, 39-year-old Ben Loomer. Sarah balanced her job as a beautician with evening and weekend work while raising her children. Ben, originally from Greenwich, had moved to Mallorca in the early 2000s with aspirations of becoming a pilot. The pair had met in December 2004 on a dating website. He made a good impression with Sarah's 2 sons, and Sarah decided to leave her job and she and her 2 boys would move to Mallorca to start afresh with Ben. But the happiness didn't last long. Due to her being unable to speak Spanish, she couldn't find a job, and this, coupled with her homesickness, made it very difficult for Sarah. Ben also wasn't able to become a pilot, so instead worked at the airport. They subsequently decided to move back to the UK, having already welcomed their first child. After settling into a new 4-bedroom home, 22 Baysy Shore in New Ash Green, Ben began working as a taxi driver, and Sarah would work as a beauty therapist. But the issues in the relationship began to show, with the pair arguing often. Sarah eventually decided to call time on the relationship, and in response, Ben threw her and her 2 sons out whilst keeping the 3 children they had together with him. Ben had arranged a court hearing for the very next morning in which he said Sarah had abandoned her children and consequently he was awarded custody. Sarah was unable to defend herself as she was unaware as to what was happening. Sarah was devastated. She and her eldest 2 children went to live with her mother and stepfather. The family saved every penny so they could be able to go and see a solicitor for legal advice. And in August 2016, she would be awarded full custody of the children. It was also around this time that her personal life began to move in a more positive direction when she met Neil James. Sarah met Neil on a dating app in 2016, and their relationship would go from strength to strength, culminating in an engagement. But Sarah was worried that if she tried to move in with Neil, Ben would battle her for custody. In 2018, she offered Ben the opportunity for them to live in the house together and co-parent their children despite their romantic relationship coming to an end, something her family had begged her not to do. This wasn't by any means an ideal solution, as emotions between them were still running high. So Sarah decided to try and buy Ben's share of the house from him. Sarah had taken her children to school in the morning before heading to work to see her clients. She was also incredibly excited and happy as she had been able to secure a new, higher-paying job. At around 8 p.m., Sarah was seen coming home and heading inside. She sent several text messages, including to Neil. One message to a friend read, "There's always something to look forward to. You've just got to open your eyes and dream." The last text message was sent at 10 p.m. before she headed to bed. The next day was an incredibly special one as it was one of her children's birthdays and, like always, she had planned for it. As the morning rolled around, Neil sent her a text message, but Sarah didn't reply. As the hours continued to tick by, Sarah still hadn't responded. Neil decided to reach out to Ben to see if he had seen her. Ben replied saying he thought Sarah was with him as he hadn't seen her either. Neil called Sarah's family and explained that he had been trying to get hold of Sarah since the morning but hadn't been able to make contact with her. Sarah could sometimes forget to charge her phone or accidentally leave it in the car, so her mother decided to call her too. But like Neil, she couldn't get hold of her. One of Sarah's sons used text messages, social media, and calling her work phone to try and get a response, but there was still nothing from Sarah. By the next day, she still hadn't come home. Her mother kept trying to get hold of her, but as Sarah continued to not respond, her mother knew something was seriously wrong. Everyone was becoming extremely concerned for her. They agreed that if by the next day she hadn't made contact with anyone or come home, they would call the police. It had now been 48 hours since Sarah Walgreen had been seen, and she still had not been in contact with anyone. Ben contacted the police. DCI Ivan Beasley, senior investigating officer with Kent Police, was assigned to investigate her disappearance. Ben told the officers that after Sarah had arrived home on 9th, he had put the children to bed and gone into his room, which was the loft conversion one, and she had gone to her room on the first floor. He explained that when he had woken up the next morning, Sarah wasn't home, but the car was still parked in its spot. As it was one of her children's birthdays, he said he had expected her to come home. A missing persons investigation was quickly underway and a search of her bedroom was conducted. One thing immediately stood out. All of Sarah's personal effects were still there, including her money, bank cards, keys, and handbag. These were not things Sarah would have left without. For DCI Ivan Beasley, this was extremely concerning. As she had left her car keys at the house, one theory that was considered was that maybe she had gone out for a run or walk and become injured and unable to get help. A 5-mile search radius was set up around Sarah's home, going through fields and woodlands to try and find her, even checking hospitals to see if she had been admitted to any of them. In spite of all this, and after an extensive search, there was still no sign of Sarah. There were no phone records to indicate that she had agreed to meet up with anyone that night. DCI Ivan Beasley noted Ben Loomer's demeanor. He said, "Ben didn't seem to be that concerned. The way he was presenting to us was described to me by my officers as quite odd. He didn't really want to engage with us. He didn't really want us at the house, which for somebody who had reported Sarah missing, he didn't seem to be acting in that way." He also said that officers discovered that Sarah's family had had to pressure Ben into contacting the police in the first place. Sarah's son utilized social media and the close-knit community immediately came together to look for her. Hundreds of people from the local area came in to help. One of the volunteers, Sharon Brine, noted Ben Loomer's behavior. She said, "We were very baffled with Ben when during day 3 or 4 of our searching, he went into the village office to book the village hall and we thought it was completely bizarre. There's half the village looking for the mother of his children and he's trying to arrange a kids game in the village." Sarah's oldest 2 children attempted to visit their siblings but were told they weren't allowed. Loomer had taken the 3 youngest to his aunt's house and he had also started court proceedings to gain custody of them. DCI Beasley said, within a few days of her disappearance, Ben had gone to the family court and was trying to have an urgent meeting so he could have primary custody of the children. In order to generate any leads, the police issued a press appeal to get information about Sarah out to the public. But as the days continued to pass, Sarah Walgreen still hadn't been found. Concerns continued to escalate that she may have been met with foul play. Detective Superintendent Paul Fotheringham said, "We have experts with specialist technology and forensic scientists working with us to try and find Sarah." Police went back to speak with Ben again to try and gain a better understanding of the dynamics and ins and outs of the family home. He told them that Sarah would often go missing, disappearing without telling anyone, to go and meet other people. The police went to Neil's house to search the property and ask him further questions as he was one of the last people she had had contact with. He explained that he had called her at 9:24 on the night she had last been seen. They spoke for around 15 minutes and then sent a few text messages back and forth before they said goodnight. Phone records showed that this was true, and as he was at home with his daughter at the time, he told the police to check the M25 cameras to prove he hadn't driven to Sarah's. His story checked out and Neil was in the clear. It had now been a week since Sarah Walgreen had seemingly vanished and police decided to check the local cameras and more than 15,000 hours of footage would be searched. At around 2 a.m. on October 10th, the same time Sarah went missing, CCTV cameras picked up a car driving around. One of the images picked up on camera showed the vehicle with a logo on the driver's side door. Why did this pique the interest of investigators? Because it was similar to the vehicle driven by Ben Loomer, a red taxi with a logo on the driver's side door. But the police had to be sure. They brought in an expert to compare his vehicle to the grainy one on the footage. The expert determined that the footage did show Ben's vehicle. Around 2 hours after it had first been captured on CCTV, the same vehicle was seen coming back. This appeared to contradict his assertions that he had been at home in bed when Sarah had gone missing. The home had an extensive CCTV system which was operated from Ben's bedroom so he could see the goings-on throughout the house. DCI Beasley said it was quite an elaborate setup. He had cameras at the side, at the front, and at the back of his house, all controlled by an assistant which was kept in his bedroom, which was in the converted attic part of the house. They checked the footage from the day Sarah had vanished. Ben was seen coming home, and nobody else was seen entering the property before Sarah came back. It wasn't just their home that had security cameras. Their neighbor's home did too. The neighbor's home had 3 months' worth of footage to watch. They could see that the CCTV camera from Ben and Sarah's home had been on almost constantly in the time leading up to Sarah going missing. The footage from the neighbor's house showed the infrared light coming from Ben's cameras and also showed that after midnight on the day she had last been seen, Ben's cameras had been switched off. Ben said the files from the cameras at his house weren't usable as they had been corrupted, and that the complex system in place actually hadn't been working for the past year. Another piece of footage that stood out to investigators showed him coming home. In the footage, his vehicle was clean. After taking the children to school the next day, the car was caught on CCTV again, and this time there was mud and dirt on the sides and wheels. At around 10:30, he went to the office where his taxi company operated. When the car pulls in, the dirt is gone. Another element that stood out was after watching the neighbor's camera, the police learned that he would always park his car in the same spot until the night Sarah had gone missing. That night, he parked it at the back of the property, somewhere not covered by the neighbor's CCTV. The task in front of the officers was huge. They didn't know where Ben had driven to that night and what he had done in the 2-hour window, and Sarah still hadn't been found. The police believed that he had murdered Sarah and then driven her body to a deposition site. On December 20th, the decision was made to arrest Ben Leckenber on suspicion of the murder of Sarah Wellgreen. He was then taken to the station to be questioned. Over the next 7 hours, he was interviewed by investigators. Loomer was silent and refused to answer any question put to him. During a search of the house, a shovel was found in the garden shed that appeared to be brand new. They needed to find Sarah, ascertain the cause of death, and prove that this had been done deliberately by Ben Leckenber. Specialists from the fire service and marine units from all over the country were drafted into the extensive searches to try and find her, including part of the Thames and land near the Blue Water Shopping Center. Roads were closed off while searches were conducted and 1,400 sites were searched, but none led to Sarah's body. In spite of this, and on the basis of the case that had been built, on the December 28, 2018, Ben Leckenber was charged with the murder of Sarah Wellgreen. At Woolwich Crown Court, the trial of Ben Leckenber would begin. Prosecutor Alex Morgan QC would say in a documentary about the case, "Having a trial with nobody presents unique challenges." One of the key moments for the prosecution was revealing a conversation that Ben had had with police several days before his arrest. They had requested his phone. He signed a consent form but then refused to give consent for deleted data to be retrieved. He told them that he would give it to them the next day at the station because it was late and he wanted to go to bed. But CCTV revealed that Ben hadn't gone to bed. His car was spotted parked by the River Thames later night trying to get rid of something police believe was his mobile phone. Following Sarah going missing, Bakumba was captured on a CCTV camera in a shop buying a new phone in the exact same make that he put his old SIM card into. DCI Beasley said, "Usually we get a lot of cooperation from people, especially when there are concerns for a loved one. But actually, Ben was more interested in the information we could retrieve from his phone and refused to give us his phone." Another element of the case that they argued was evidence of planning was the hours in between him leaving the address and coming home, indicating he had already chosen the deposition site for Sarah's body. When it came to the shovel that had been found during the search, the defense argued that it was there for his mother so she could look after the flowers that were in front of the house. But the flowers at the home did not require such a big shovel, adding to the theory that it had been potentially used to dig a grave. Alison Morgan QC from the prosecution said that the idea he had bought what she referred to as a gravedigger shovel as a present for his mother was complete nonsense. Over the course of the trial, more information would be revealed that painted a clearer picture of Ben and Sarah's relationship. When she arrived home from work on the October 9th, she told Ben that she was planning to buy his share of the house as her new job would leave her in a financial situation where that was feasible. This meant that in more ways than one, Ben Loomer was losing control. And if she were to leave him for good and sell the house, he would have been left with virtually nothing. The judge, jury, counsel, court clerk, and ushers were given a police escort to the family home to help them contextualize the evidence and see the inner workings of the home, including the intricate CCTV system. Defense barrister Rebecca Trawler QC concluded their case by saying, "What I ask of you is a lot less than what the prosecution asked. They are asking you to convict a 39-year-old man with no criminal convictions, not even cautions, of the carefully planned murder of the mother of his children. That is a big ask." After 30 days of the trial, it was time for the jury to deliberate. They would soon return their verdict. On October 28, 2019, Ben Lacumber was found guilty of the murder of Sarah Wellgreen. He received life in prison with a minimum term of 27 years. He has never revealed what happened to Sarah or where she is. Should he continue to refuse to divulge any information, it could mean he remains in prison for a longer time under Helen's Law. Helen's Law, named after murder victim Helen McCourt, makes killers ineligible for parole if they do not tell police where they've hidden the body of a victim. This followed the tireless campaigning of Marie McCourt, mother of Helen, a 22-year-old insurance clerk who was murdered in 1988. Her murderer, Ian Sims, has never revealed her body's location. The petition calling for Helen's Law had gained more than 600,000 signatures and high-level government support. In November 2020, Helen's Law received royal assent. Under the law, killers could still be released if no longer deemed a risk to the public, even if they refuse to disclose information. But the parole board will be legally required to consider whether they have cooperated with inquiries as part of their assessment. One of Sarah's elder sons said, "There's still that missing piece, and it will always be like that because there'll always be that missing piece because of what he has done. I believe he's withholding that because that's the only sort of power he has left." Sarah's ex-husband also spoke about him wanting her body to be found. In the year that followed her disappearance, nearly 3,000 potential deposition sites have been identified, but none have led to Sarah. The community in New Ash Green has never given up on their search for Sarah Wellgreen. They have said they will never stop their search for her, and a Facebook page called Search for Sarah Wellgreen was set up too. For those who knew and loved Sarah, the agony of not knowing where she is and what happened to her is devastating. It is the hope of Sarah's family that he will one day reveal her whereabouts so that she can finally be brought home and laid to rest. Discover the chilling world of secret crime mysteries, where we delve into the most perplexing cold cases and unsolved crimes. Join us as we unravel hidden clues and explore haunting mysteries. Subscribe now and be part of the journey to bring these cases to light. On January 15, 2018, a British Airways flight landed at London's Heathrow Airport from Chicago's O'Hare International Airport. As passengers disembarked, airport officials soon discovered an issue with one individual. This passenger had arrived in London without any documentation, including a boarding pass or passport. The individual was 66-year-old Marilyn Hartman, who had no boarding pass because she had never bought a ticket for the flight. Instead, she had somehow bypassed both British Airways ticket agents and security checks in Chicago to board the plane without a valid pass. She simply walked on board and sat in an empty seat, not raising any concerns with the flight crew. Hartman was sent back to Chicago, where she was taken into custody and charged with felony theft in connection to taking the flight without purchasing a ticket, reported to cost between $24,100 to $34,100, as well as with a misdemeanor trespassing charge for entering the airport illegally. This was far from the first time Hartman had entered a secure area of an airport or boarded an actual flight without a valid ticket. Authorities would later compile a list of dozens of incidents involving Hartman at various airports across the United States. Hartman would later claim the total number was much higher, reporting incidents that occurred in flights she took without attracting any attention from authorities. According to Hartman, she first successfully snuck onto a flight without a ticket in 2002 when she took a flight from Chicago to Copenhagen. She claims to have snuck onto another flight, this time to Paris, later that same year. Given her later troubles in London, trying to get through customs and immigration without proper documentation, these claims of free international travel may be viewed with some skepticism. There is, however, extensive documentation of Hartman's domestic antics at airports. She was arrested in Hawaii in 2009 while using another woman's identity trying to board a flight without a ticket. She spent much of February-March of 2014 at San Francisco International Airport, coming into contact with police on 5 different occasions. On February 15th, Hartman successfully made it through security and onto a plane that was bound for Hawaii. She sat down in a seat on the plane, but when the person with the ticket assigning them to that seat came on board, the flight crew realized that Hartman did not have a boarding pass. Police interviewed her but released her. They did the same 3 days later when she was apprehended trying to get through a security gate. She was finally arrested 2 days after that, carrying someone else's discarded boarding pass and charged with trespassing. A court order prohibited Hartman from returning to San Francisco International unless she had a valid ticket for a flight. However, she was found eating at the food court in the airport's Terminal A on March 18th. She was arrested on suspicion of violating a court order and trespassing. She was again arrested for the same reasons on March 26th when police found her at the baggage claim in Terminal 3 of the airport. Hartman attracted national media attention in August of 2014 when she was arrested after successfully sneaking onto a plane and taking a flight from San Jose to Los Angeles. When she went before a judge, she was told to stay away from airports unless she had a boarding pass. Just a few days later, however, Hartman was back at the airport. She was taken into custody and, this time, sentenced to 6 months in jail. But due to overcrowding, she was released after just 3 days. Hartman then went on to have similar multi-day interactions with police after getting through security at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport and Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. She was generally only given warnings after each incident, although she did eventually serve 3 days in jail for trespassing following her second incident in Minnesota. Hartman did face slightly more serious charges after turning up in Florida a short time later, reportedly after successfully flying there from Minnesota without a ticket. After landing at Jacksonville International Airport, she took a shuttle to the Omni Amelia Island Plantation Hotel, claiming to be a woman who was a registered guest there. At the hotel, she checked in under the same woman's reservation. This led to her being charged with fraud by impersonation, defrauding an innkeeper, and trespassing. Her public defenders were able to get her felony fraud charge dropped down to a misdemeanor, and Hartman was released after they had her declared mentally unstable. After leaving Florida, Hartman returned to Chicago, which appears to be her hometown. There are few concrete details available about Hartman's early life. She appears to have been born Marilyn Stahl and legally changed her last name to Hartman in 1985. She grew up on the south side of Chicago and attended Chicago Vocational High School, where she was a member of the National Honor Society and the chorus. She graduated in 1969, and within a few years, she was no longer in contact with anyone from her family. She reportedly has 3 brothers who have not heard from her since the early 1970s and who do not like to publicly speak about her at all, much less in any detail. Hartman claims to have grown up in a violent home with mentally ill family members. Although these statements are difficult to corroborate, an important factor in Hartman's behavior to consider is the fact that she is mentally ill, although the exact nature of her illness is not publicly known. Legal documents state that she suffers from depression and post-traumatic stress disorder, and she has stated that she has bipolar disorder. She further stated in court in 2022 that she has struggled with depression and medication management throughout her life. Hartman also has a conspiratorial worldview, which plays into her explanation as to why she continues to sneak into airports and onto airplanes. While with journalist Joe Eskenazi for a 2015 article he wrote about her, Hartman detailed what she believed to be an elaborate plot against her that compelled her to attempt to get past airport security and onto planes without tickets and had resulted in her various legal troubles. Hartman claimed that the conspiracy against her began in 1990 when she exposed a Chicago lawyer working with a retired FBI agent to fix cases. Her actions resulted in ongoing retribution, which led to her becoming homeless on various occasions and committing her criminal actions at airports. She diagnosed herself with and apparently created what she called whistleblower trauma syndrome. She told Eskenazi that the condition resulted in a severe fight or flight reaction, which in her case literally made her feel the need to get on a flight to get away. She would say in a different interview several years later that she was always in a depressed state of mind when she snuck onto planes. According to Hartman, numerous people, including President Obama, were in on the conspiracy. She claimed she did not evade security checks at the various airports. Rather, TSA agents let her through. She further claimed that sometimes plane tickets would be left for her to find, and airport staff would let her use them, but then take her into custody once she was in a secure area of the airport. According to Hartman, the goal of this conspiracy was to land her in prison for an extended period of time, a belief that does not seem to align with reality, given the dozens of times she has been released with little to no punishment following her various incidents at airports. The purpose of highlighting this case on this channel is not to malign Marilyn Hartman specifically or individuals with mental illness in general. Rather, it is to draw attention to two major issues her case highlights: airport security and how the legal system handles individuals with mental illnesses. While someone managing to get past airport security in a post-9/11 world sounds like it should not only be impossible, but also of major concern should it occur, the Transportation Security Administration and several aviation experts, who have been consulted for articles about Hartman's case, have downplayed the security implications it has. After Hartman successfully flew from San Jose to Los Angeles without a ticket, the TSA claimed, San Jose to Los Angeles without a ticket. The TSA claimed that the incident was not a security concern because while Hartman had not been checked for a boarding pass at security, she had been screened for prohibited items, meaning she had no way of bringing any sort of weapon on board. They maintained that the incident only illustrated the need for minor changes to their document examination procedures to ensure people without boarding passes could not get through security checkpoints. While there are no indications that Hartman illegally boarded planes with any plans to commit any sort of nefarious acts, that does not change the fact that the holes in security and procedure she exploited with simple techniques could also be exploited by individuals with more malicious intentions. Hartman employed unsophisticated tactics, like blending in with large family groups at security and covering her face with her hair at airports where she was a repeat recent offender and known to airport staff. If she could find success with so little planning or effort, a more methodical and motivated mind could presumably have even more success than Hartman. The fact that potential criminals would most likely still have to be screened for prohibited items before sneaking onto a plane does not necessarily ensure that the public is safe. Just because criminal does not plan on committing a violent act while a plane is in the air does not mean that the ability to travel domestically without record or have easy undocumented access to secure areas of airports could not potentially benefit them in their criminal activities. As a non-violent offender suffering from mental illness, Hartman falls into somewhat of a gray area, according to psychology and psychiatry professor Stephen Hinshaw, cited by Joe Eskenazi in his article on Hartman. It has become more and more difficult to have individuals confined to mental health facilities against their will. While this is a great victory for individual civil rights, it also means that some of the people most in need of help and treatment are unable to get it. While Hartman should not necessarily be forced into treatment, Hartman's case raises the important legal issue of if and when the courts should be allowed to order individuals to undergo treatment for their mental health, especially in regards to offenders who have not caused physical harm to others. Hartman was required to undergo various mental health evaluations throughout her criminal career and was at times placed in voluntary treatment facilities, although she generally quickly left them. In recent years, while she has operated largely in just one jurisdiction, Hartman has been compelled into long-term treatment at different times, which did result in her various incidents at airports becoming fewer and farther between. Especially early on in her career as a serial stowaway, authorities felt sorry for Hartman because of her apparent mental health issues, which played a role in her being given such lenient sentences in the situations where she faced repercussions for her actions at all. Individuals suffering from mental illness should of course be treated with compassion, but Hartman's case raises the question of whether it is truly compassionate to release individuals in need of treatment knowing that they will most likely reoffend, since the issues that led them to committing crimes in the first place have not been addressed. After leaving Florida following the conclusion of the legal proceedings against her there, Hartman appears to have largely remained in the Chicago area. She was involved in at least 9 incidents involving trespassing and attempting to enter secure areas at both O'Hare and Midway airports, including her flight to London without a ticket. In one incident, she did purchase a valid ticket but had to be removed from the plane, which was taking off at Midway because she caused a disturbance. She was charged with misdemeanor reckless conduct. The following day, she went to O'Hare, where airport staff detained her after she attempted to get through security without a ticket. Hartman had only received 18 months of probation for the trespassing and theft charges stemming from her ticketless flight to London. Just 7 months after she received that sentence, however, she was back at an airport in violation of the terms of her probation, involved in the incident that has resulted in her most recent legal troubles. On October 11, 2019, Hartman was seen by police attempting to get through one of the security checkpoints at O'Hare International Airport. She had already made it through the first checkpoint with no ticket. She was taken into custody and charged with felony trespassing. This time, she was held without bond. Hartman was eventually placed into a mental health facility, and her lawyers negotiated a plea deal. On March 16, 2021, just 2 weeks after they reached that agreement and before it was finalized in court, Hartman fled the mental health facility, where she had been ordered to stay. She had also been ordered to wear an electronic monitoring device, so authorities were able to track her movements. She again attempted to enter O'Hare International Airport. She was taken into custody at the airport's public transportation station. Hartman would later claim that she ran away because she was upset over the early release of an interview she had given in the local media. She had been given written assurances that it would not be broadcast until after her court cases were complete, but this did not end up being the case. She escaped the facility 2 days after it actually aired. In court, her lawyer would argue that the escape had been in response to something Hartman had no control over, the early release of the interview. On March 3, 2022, Hartman appeared in court and pleaded guilty to felony counts of criminal trespass and escape from electronic monitoring. The escape charge was in relation to her running away from the mental health facility in 2021, and the criminal trespass charge was in relation to the 2019 incident that had resulted in her being placed in the facility. The judge sentenced Hartman to 18 months in prison on the trespassing charge and to 2 years in prison on the escape charge, with the 2 sentences to be served consecutively. Hartman was given credit for approximately 2 years 5 months already spent in custody. The facility she escaped from in 2021 agreed to let her return there for her court-ordered period of supervised release and mental health treatment. Hopefully, this time, her treatment will finally result in her long-term success and keep her out of the courtroom and the airport. Before we continue, 90% of you haven't subscribed to our channel, so if you like this video, please subscribe. It motivates us to make more content for you. Okay, let's continue. 24-year-old Annie Lee, originally from San Jose, California, grew up in a large family. Those who knew her described her as conscientious, polite, and friendly, with a lot of tenacity and a great sense of humor. From an early age, she stood out as an exceptional student. She was the valedictorian of her high school class, and her peers voted her as the most likely to become the next Einstein. Annie received $160,000 in scholarships and went on to earn her undergraduate degree in cell development biology from the University of Rochester. It was there that she met Jonathan Widosk. The young couple quickly became inseparable, and Annie described him as her best friend. It wasn't long before Jonathan proposed, and September 13, 2009 was chosen as their wedding date. And the wedding plans quickly got underway. After all those years of very intense and hard work, Annie was accepted into the prestigious Ivy League school, Yale University, hoping to earn her doctorate in pharmacology. She was always hands-on within her campus, getting involved in various extracurricular activities. She even wrote an article about campus safety titled Crime and Safety in New Haven for Yale Medical School's B magazine. Jonathan and Annie were living 76 miles apart at the time. Jonathan was at Columbia University working on his own doctorate, and this only made their reunion for the wedding on 13th even more special. September 7, 2009. Annie was now in her final year at Yale. It was 5 days until the wedding, and it was safe to say Annie was as busy as ever. She was definitely feeling the stress of everything and called her friend Jennifer for some friendly words of encouragement. Jennifer said Annie asked if she thought they were too young to get married. But knowing this was normal nerves combined with the stress of Yale, Jennifer said she and Jonathan were absolutely making the right decision. Annie thanked her friend for telling her what she needed to hear, hung up, and carried on with her day. September 8, 2009. Annie still had lots of work to do around the campus before she set off to Long Island. She left her apartment that morning and took the Yale Transit to her office, located on campus. She then walked to her lab where she would conduct most of her research, and this was about a minute away at 10 Amistad Street. Room G13. The day on campus soon drew to a close. Students were leaving to head home and various buildings were locking up. Annie's roommates had been expecting her home hours ago, but she was nowhere to be seen. It got to 9 p.m., and with no one able to get hold of her, her roommates called the New Haven Police Department and reported her missing. Her friend Jennifer said that Annie always made sure she was safe. She didn't walk around at night by herself, and if she ever had to work late, she would make sure someone would come and pick her up or walk home with her. So the fact that no one had received a call from her that day was very concerning. Police went to Annie's office, where they found her wallet, keys, purse, and phone. But there were no signs of a struggle inside. Her belongings still being in there indicated she had likely left that morning with the intention of returning to her office fairly soon after. None of her credit or debit cards had been used, and her phone had no activity on it since she left it in the office. Her Yale ID card seemed to be the only thing from her purse that went with her that morning, and it had been used to get into the labs. CCTV confirmed it was Annie using her own ID card, and the footage captured her walking into 10 Amistad Street at around 10 a.m. She was carrying something that can't really be made out, but it's assumed it was something to do with her research. Although CCTV can't always convey a full story, it didn't look like anything was wrong with Annie that morning. She wasn't running away from anyone. She didn't seem to be in a rush, and no one stopped to talk to her on the way in. By all accounts, it seemed like a very typical morning for her. Unfortunately, there was only one camera on the basement level where Annie's lab was located, and it didn't show her walking past or through the door at all. At 12:50 p.m. that day, a fire alarm sounded in the building, and everyone was evacuated. One of the lab technicians assigned to maintain room G13 was a man named Ray, and he came forward with information. He didn't attend Yale but had worked there for a little while. He told authorities that he had clocked in at 7 a.m. and had seen Annie in G13. He then said he thought he had seen her leave the lab just before the fire alarm went off that afternoon. The footage continued to be looked at, and authorities went into the building to see if they could see anything. Every hallway, room, cupboard, and outside bin were searched, but nothing was there. Although Ray said he remembered her leaving, they couldn't see anything on the 70 cameras around the area that confirmed this. Yale offered a $10,000 reward for any information leading to Annie's whereabouts. Her fiancé flew in from New York, and her family traveled over from California to help with the search. Annie's odd disappearance quickly became big news. Reporters were all over the campus, and over 100 law enforcement officers joined the search too. Authorities weren't initially sure if they were dealing with an abduction or something even more sinister, but some believed Annie had maybe got cold feet about her wedding and run away. This was quickly refuted by her friends and family, however. Annie had been planning the wedding for over a year and hadn't ever shown any signs of changing her mind about it. One of her friends said she was doing weather patterns to make sure the weather would be perfect on her wedding day. She wanted everything to be perfect, everything down to the table napkins to flowers. Annie was very, very excited about this day. Her disappearance just days before the wedding made no sense. With still nothing from Annie, a second search of the building was conducted, and this time, a closer look at room G13 uncovered a drop of blood on one of the shelving units. And, in a back storage room, G22, some beads that were determined to have been part of Annie's necklace were also found on the floor. On September 12th, after finding the blood, police started a more in-depth search of G13. Lifting up one of the ceiling tiles, they found a bloody sock and a single blue surgical glove. They then brought in luminol, which was used across the neighboring labs, including G22. More blood was found in there. There was also a distinctly terrible smell developing around the locker rooms and toilets near to G22. A smell that some of the officers knew all too well. Cadaver dogs were brought in to try and locate the source of it, and the whole building was declared a crime scene. A day later, 5 p.m., on September 13, 2009, Annie Lee's decomposing body was found, stuffed upside down inside a wall, behind a metal utility panel in the basement of the building, near the lockers and room of G22. September 13th was the day that Annie should have been walking down the aisle, and it was a tragic end to the 5-day search. The state medical examiner determined that Annie had died from traumatic asphyxiation by neck compression. She had a broken jaw and broken collarbone, and these injuries happened to her when she was alive. Further examination showed evidence of a sexual assault. Near to her body was her key card and a blue surgical glove that paired with the one found under the ceiling tile. DNA samples were taken from her clothes and the area around her body and sent off to see if there was a hit on the combined DNA index system, Cody's. A vigil was held for Annie on campus, and the loss of one of their own hung heavily over the staff and students. The school made grief counselors available for everyone, as well as a 24-hour helpline to anyone that needed it. Because of the access codes and IDs that people needed to get around the campus, Officer Joe Avery said they were not investigating this as a random act, instead, believing it to be an inside job. He also said they didn't believe that any of the students were involved, and no one else was in any danger. This was reiterated by Robert Alpern, Dean of the Yale School of Medicine. He said, "I think that it suggests it was someone who could get into that space. It certainly would be extremely difficult for someone outside of Yale to get into that space. Not impossible, but extremely difficult." This only added to the foreboding feeling hanging over the already frightened campus. Students were scared about moving from class to class. Some said they were now traveling in big groups, even during the middle of the day. Others were turning down shifts at work around the university, for fear that whoever had done this was likely still walking around the campus too. It wasn't long before a hit came back on the DNA. A match came back to a convicted felon named Kieran Robinson. This was not actually the clear-cut answer the police had been looking for. It was soon confirmed that Kieran had been shot and killed a long time before anything in Annie's case had ever happened, and his DNA being near her body could be easily explained. Kieran had actually been one of the people that helped with some construction on that particular building in the years before he died. And with no other matches on the Cody's database, police were still searching. More days would pass, and by this point, detectives had reviewed about 700 hours of video and interviewed over 150 people. There was one more person that had been on the detectives' radar since the start, but they didn't quite have enough to prove anything just yet. Using the keycard data, it was confirmed that only 2 other people had swiped into room G13 that day. One was a third-party contractor that was ruled out very quickly, and the other was 24-year-old Raymond Clark, the lab technician that told police he had seen Annie leaving the building that day. Little did Ray know, this one claim to police had put him straight in their eye line. As the cameras had already confirmed, she absolutely did not leave. He had a reputation of being controlling and often quite nasty to any students that left the lab dirty. Gray had in fact emailed Annie to complain about her leaving dirty mice cages behind after one of her studies. That being said, Yale had no record of disciplinary action taken against him at any point. Others, however, said Ray was pleasant and personable. Between 10:40 a.m. that morning until around 3:45 p.m., Ray had gone in and out of G13 and G22, a total of 55 times, and this was confirmed using his keycard and the cameras. They also captured Ray leaving when the fire alarm went off that afternoon and coming back in at 1:10. He walked around the basement area wearing slightly different scrubs before clocking off just before 4 p.m. At one point during the day, Ray went out onto the streets and sat down on the steps with his head in his hands. When police spoke to him, they noticed scratches on his face and arm, along with some fairly fresh bruises. He said the scratches came from a cat. He was asked to come in for a polygraph test, which shows signs of deception. But, as always, a polygraph test is not admissible, and this wasn't enough for them to hold him. They asked him to submit a DNA sample before he left, which he did. And with this, he was let go while they awaited the results. A total of 4 search warrants and the results of the DNA test had finally confirmed that he was Annie's killer. The bloody sock found in the wall and the lab coat Ray was wearing contained both sets of DNA. Ray had signed into the building that day with a green pen. A green pen was found under Annie's body, with both hers and Ray's DNA on it. This, along with the keycard data and camera footage, cemented everything. They believe Annie was killed just before the fire alarm went off. Ray quickly changed his scrubs, which had blood on them, and left Annie in the lab before heading out when the alarm went off, before hurrying back in, moving her body through G22, and then forcing her behind the panel. All police could find that might have pointed to some sort of motive was an email. On the day Annie was killed, she sent out a mass email to the whole building saying that she was getting married on 13th and would be away for a few days on her honeymoon. Ray had opened this email. Ray was engaged to be married too, and police could only speculate on this. But they wondered if Ray had had a secret obsession with Annie for a while, and reading this email spiraled into a fit of jealousy and rage. He was held on a $3 million bond, and his lawyer told people he was expected to plead not guilty. Annie would soon be laid to rest, and her funeral was broadcast live online. Her mother, Vivian, made an emotional speech. Jonathan also wore the wedding ring Annie should have given him. Despite initially pleading not guilty, Ray Clark soon changed his plea. He pleaded guilty to murder in exchange for a 44-year sentence. He was also found guilty of attempting to commit a sexual assault. The sexual assault plea was entered under Connecticut's Alford Doctrine, which means the defendant doesn't agree to the facts, but acknowledges that the state has enough evidence to gain a conviction. Ray Clark is scheduled for release in 2053. He will be almost 70 years old. Ray's father, Raymond Clark Jr., said, "It is with a heavy heart that I stand here before you today. We will live out our life knowing that he is behind bars. But we are proud of Ray for taking responsibility for his actions and pleading guilty. I want you to know that Ray has expressed extreme remorse from the very beginning. I can't tell you how many times he has sobbed uncontrollably, telling me how sorry he is, telling me how his heart is tortured by the reality that he caused the death of Annie." Annie's mother did not attend the sentencing because it was too painful, but she said her family were happy with the result. Although Annie's killer was caught and convicted, the real reason behind her death remains a total mystery, as Ray has never said or explained why. A Yale spokesman, Michael Moran, said, "As the criminal proceedings come to a close, we renew our commitment to honor the memory of Annie Lee, whose joy of life and learning is an inspiration to faculty, students, and staff at Yale, now and for the future." Annie had a bright future ahead of her in so many ways. Just days away from marrying her best friend and soon to complete a doctorate she had worked so very hard for, Annie's friend, Natalie, said she was as good a human being as you'd ever hope to meet. Virginia Freeman, who went by the nickname Ginger, was an outgoing and personable woman with a bubbly personality. She was always smiling and loved working with people. She found a career that perfectly fit her personality as a real estate agent. While she was a natural fit for such a career because she could so easily work with the wide variety of clients she had, she was also very passionate about real estate, and according to her coworkers, her eyes would sparkle when she began talking about the ins and outs of the industry. In 1981, 40-year-old Ginger was working at Real Estate Mart in Bryan, Texas. At that time, all of the real estate agents there happened to be women. She lived with her husband Charles in neighboring College Station, Texas. Their son, Brad, was 11 years old and their daughter, Betsy, was 14. There was nothing more important to Ginger than her family. Some of her coworkers mistakenly thought she worked part-time rather than full-time because she worked so diligently and efficiently while she was at the office that she was able to leave earlier in the day than most other employees. She worked so hard in order to have more time with her children. She built demanding work schedule around her children's needs and did everything she could to be home when they arrived home from school. Ginger was very active and loved the outdoors. She regularly went hiking and backpacking with her family. What little free time Ginger had when she was not working or caring for her family was spent volunteering. She was an active volunteer at her church and with the Girl Scouts and the American Red Cross. Her love of nature helped her always come up with new ideas for outdoor activities for the Girl Scouts. She further volunteered to work with international students at Texas A&M University, helping them adjust to living in the United States. On December 1st, 1981, Ginger had plans to go out to dinner with her husband and two of their friends. However, around 3 o'clock that afternoon, a call came into her office. A man, described as having a country-sounding accent, said he had $73,000 in cash he wanted to use to purchase a home that was for sale on Greens Prairie Road. At the time, the home was on a secluded road in a rural section of College Station. Not wanting to miss out on a cash sale, which could generally be completed more quickly and easily than a finance sale, Ginger agreed to meet the caller at the property to show him the house. On her way, she stopped at home to see her children. She told them where she was going and that she would be back home in time for dinner. Ginger did not arrive home in time to go to the dinner. Around 7 p.m., her worried husband Charles reported her missing. He also called her office and got the address of the home Ginger had been going to show the potential buyer. He and the husband of one of Ginger's co-workers went out to search for her, starting out at the home she had been going to show that afternoon. Behind the remote home, they discovered Ginger's body. Ginger had been struck in the head with a blunt object, believed to be a 4.5-pound slab of concrete. She had been strangled with enough force that her neck was broken, and she had been stabbed in the neck 11 times. A later examination would determine that she had been assaulted. Her time of death was placed at approximately 3:30 p.m., just a half hour after Ginger received the phone call that brought her to the property. The home on the property was still locked, indicating that Ginger was most likely attacked as soon as she arrived to the home. Marks dug into the dirt at the scene illustrated how fiercely Ginger had fought for her life. 2 days after the murder, a group of local real estate agents announced that they were collectively offering a $10,000 reward for information in the case. More than 900 people were in attendance at Ginger's funeral on December 4, 1981. In February of 1982, a memorial fund was established in Ginger's name to help assist international students and their families when they arrived in Texas. On May 2, 1982, the Girl Scouts of Central Texas dedicated a secluded plot of land at their campground in Bryan, Camp Howdy, to Ginger's memory. The land was named the Ginger Freeman Primitive Area and is where young campers are taught to set up their campsites. Bo Ward, one of Ginger's co-workers at the real estate mart, would go on to use Ginger's story to teach new real estate agents about how to keep themselves safe while showing homes, particularly to clients they had not previously met. Even as decades passed after Ginger's murder, Bo could never bring herself to sell a home in the area where Ginger was killed. The early investigation was thorough and far-reaching, but did not identify a suspect that could be conclusively tied to Ginger's murder. Even as years passed after the murder, authorities did not give up on the investigation. Several known serial killers, including Coral Eugene Watts and Henry Lee Lucas, were interviewed as part of the investigation but ultimately ruled out as suspects. More than 6 leads were pursued over the years, with investigators traveling all over the United States to look into potential suspects. Witnesses were hypnotized in hopes of them remembering new details. While DNA testing was not available to law enforcement at the time of Ginger's murder, investigator Dick Gullidge had the foresight to have Ginger's hands covered with plastic bags at the crime scene. He coordinated with the medical examiner's office to make sure that Ginger's fingernails and any material under them were preserved. Decades later, testing would show that the killer's DNA had been deposited under Ginger's fingernails as she tried to fight him off. The DNA would prove to be crucial evidence once technology advanced to the point where investigators could properly utilize it. Evidence from the case was submitted for DNA testing in 1997, and a DNA profile was developed. Over the years, there was no match to it found in criminal databases or to any of the numerous suspects authorities collected DNA samples from. A major break in the case came in early 2017 when the television program National Geographic Explorer offered to pay for advanced DNA analysis in the case in exchange for investigators' cooperation in filming a segment about Ginger's murder. The DNA testing in question was Snapshot, a forensic analysis program developed by Parabon Nanolabs. The program predicts certain physical features, like hair color and eye color. An individual is likely to have based on DNA profile and generates images of what they may look like. The analysis produced 2 images of what Ginger's killer may have looked like at different ages. Brazos County Sheriff Chris Kirk revealed the images at a press conference in April of 2017 with the hope that a member of the public would come forward identifying a man who resembled the man in the images who could be investigated as a potential suspect. It would be Parabon's further work with the department that would ultimately help close the case. However, in June of 2018, Sheriff Kirk held another press conference, this time announcing that Parabon had used genetic genealogy to provide clear and convincing evidence that Ginger's killer was James Otto Earhart. Earhart could not be arrested and tried in connection with her murder, however, as he had been executed by the state of Texas on August 11, 1999. Earhart had been sentenced to death after being convicted of capital murder for the 1987 murder of 9-year-old Candy Kirtland. Candy was a 4th grade student at Crockett Elementary School in Bryan, Texas. She went missing on May 12, 1987 after being dropped off by her school bus near her home. Her body, still in the clothes she had been wearing the day she went missing, was discovered hidden under debris in a wooded area off of a dirt road in Bryan. Her arms had been bound behind her back with electrical cord, and she had been shot once in the back of her head. Earhart had been in Candy's neighborhood recently, inquiring about a paint gun that had been offered for sale in a newspaper ad. Witnesses saw him and his vehicle near Candy's home the day she went missing. He was taken into custody in connection to Candy's disappearance, just hours before her body was discovered. He claimed to have given Candy a ride the day she disappeared, but maintained his innocence in her murder. He was tried and found guilty based on witness testimony and blood evidence. According to authorities, Earhart had been on their radar during the investigation into Ginger's murder. DNA evidence tied him to the crime after Parabon uploaded the DNA profile generated from the evidence found under Ginger's fingernails into genealogy databases. They then identified 2 women they believed to be the killer's second cousins based on the amount of DNA they shared with the submitted profile. They then researched the descendants of the 2 women's shared great-grandparents, one of whom was Earhart. A sample of Earhart's DNA had not been collected prior to his execution. His son agreed to provide authorities with a sample of his DNA, which showed that he was the son of the contributor of the DNA found at the crime scene. This led to the announcement identifying Earhart as Ginger's murderer. Earhart's remains were exhumed in June of 2018 to obtain a direct DNA sample. When the testing on that sample was completed in August of 2019, it confirmed that the DNA found under Ginger's fingernails belonged to Earhart. Nearly 38 years after Ginger was killed, authorities believed they finally conclusively identified her killer. "We are all elated to finally close this case," Sheriff Kirk said. "The one regret I have is that we weren't able to put handcuffs on the suspect and prosecute him for the vicious killing of Virginia Freeman." Ginger's husband, Charles, did not live long enough to see his wife's killer identified. Ginger's children were living in Austin at the time Earhart was named as their mother's killer. They released a statement thanking law enforcement for their dedication to their mother's case. Helene Anderson, known as Nikki, was born on October 15, 1958, in South Bend, Indiana. By early 1986, 27-year-old Nikki was residing in a duplex at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in Bremerton, Washington, while working at a nearby Arby's restaurant. She lived on Magnolia Drive with her 2 children, 4-year-old Adrienne and 7-month-old Marcus. Adrienne's father, Kenny Hale, described his daughter as a gift from God with a charming smile and a strong personality, even at such a young age. He noted that she was exceptionally advanced, being able to spell her name by the age of 2. Although Kenny and Nikki's relationship had not lasted, they remained connected due to their love for Adrienne. They co-parented effectively and spent time together with her regularly. By January 1986, Nikki was engaged to Marcus's father, who was serving in the United States Navy and stationed in San Diego. Nikki was in the midst of packing up her home in preparation for moving to California to be closer to him. Adrienne would be staying in Washington with Kenny for a period of time while her mother got settled in California before joining her there. Kenny was at Nikki's home on the evening of January 29th, spending time with Adrienne after he got off of work. When the time came for Kenny to leave, Adrienne asked him if she could spend the night at his house. He thought about bringing her home with him, but ultimately told his daughter no because he did not want Adrienne to have to wake up extra early so that he could bring her back to Nikki's house so as to keep her on her usual schedule. He told Adrienne he would see her the next day before he left for the evening. Adrienne waved to him from the house's front window as he left. Kenny returned to the home on Magnolia Drive the following evening, as planned. He was surprised when there was no answer when he knocked on the front door. Disappointed, he turned around to leave. However, as he did, he could hear Nikki's son, Marcus, whimpering inside the house. Concerned, he tried the front door and found that it was unlocked. He had trouble fully opening the door as something inside was blocking the door's path. Kenny tripped over something as he entered the home. When he reached down, he grabbed something stiff. His heart dropped when he realized he was holding his daughter's leg. It was dark inside the home, but Kenny could see Adrian lying on the floor near the front door and Nikki lying further inside the home. Kenny grabbed baby Marcus, who was in a playpen just feet away from his mother, and ran next door to the neighbor's home to get help. While the neighbor called police, Kenny ran back to Adrienne. Not knowing how long she had been there, he frantically began performing CPR on his daughter. Tragically, his efforts could not save his little girl. It would later be determined that Adrian and Nikki had been dead, and baby Marcus had been alone in the home with their bodies for approximately 20 hours. Nikki and Adrian had both been strangled to death. In addition, Nikki had suffered blows to the back of her head. Defensive wounds showed that she had fought fiercely against her killer. She had been sexually assaulted, which police believed was the motive for her murder. Robbery did not appear to be a motive, as valuables that were out in plain sight had been left behind. Adrienne had been found in her pajamas with the comforter from her bed near her. Investigators theorized that she had been woken up by the noise created by the struggle of the killer attacking her mother, and she had come into the living room to see what was going on. Based on where her body was found, she appears to have tried to escape the house, with the killer catching her just before she reached the front door. Police believed she was killed because she saw her mother's killer and was old enough to potentially identify him. Police theorized that 7-month-old Marcus was not killed because he was not old enough to describe or identify the killer. The killer placed Marcus in a playpen along with a cushion he removed from a nearby couch. Nikki's neighbor on the other side of the duplex says she did not hear anything the night of the murders. Normally, she could hear everyday noises through their shared wall, but she heard no screams or a struggle that night. She later said that she had an ear infection at the time, which may have impacted her hearing. She did hear Marcus crying throughout the day following the murders, but assumed it was just his normal cries for food or a fresh diaper. 2 other witnesses in the neighborhood reported hearing one scream the night of the murders, but nothing else. Numerous people had come to the home looking for Nikki on January 30th, including an acquaintance, a coworker, and a furniture salesman. Some of them came to the home multiple times, but no one tried to open the front door until that evening when Kenny Hale heard Marcus crying. Nikki's fiancé was confirmed to have been on duty at his naval base in San Diego at the time of the murders, eliminating him as a potential suspect. While Kenny Hale did have an alibi for the time of the murders as well, he remained under suspicion in the early days of the investigation. Police were skeptical of the peaceful co-parenting relationship he had with Nikki, viewed her upcoming move as a potential motive, and knew Kenny had regular access to the home. Kenny wanted to do whatever he could to help with the investigation and was shocked when he realized he was being considered as a suspect. His sister told him he should hire a lawyer soon after the murders. Kenny did not see how this would be necessary, but took her advice, which quickly proved to be a wise decision when he was aggressively questioned by police. Kenny agreed to undergo a voluntary polygraph examination, but his lawyer terminated the exam halfway through it, pointing out that Kenny was still too emotionally distraught for the results of the examination to be accurate. According to Kenny, after he walked out of the police station that day, it would be a decade before he heard anything more from police. The case soon went cold, with police following up on all the leads they could initially identify within the first 6 to 8 months of the investigation. Authorities identified a handful of potential suspects, including the boyfriend of Nikki's aunt, a neighbor who had babysat Adrienne, and a man whose car was seen in the neighborhood that night, but none of them could be tied to the murders. The case was reopened by police in 1993, 2003, 2009, and 2019, but the renewed efforts have so far not led to any arrests. In the later efforts, Kenny Hale was contacted by investigators and made aware of their ongoing efforts. There is one major clue in the case, but authorities have so far been unable to use it to identify the killer. DNA evidence, believed to be from the killer, was found at the scene. The exact source of the DNA has not been publicly disclosed. Bremerton Police Detective Marty Garland, who has most recently been overseeing the investigation, has stated that it is unclear if the sexual assault against Nikki was, in his words, completed. A local newspaper reported in 2010 that a drop of blood that did not belong to either Nikki or Adrienne had been found on Adrienne's nightgown, but this has not been confirmed as the source of the DNA. Unfortunately, wherever the DNA came from, it has proven to be of limited use to the investigation. Despite advanced testing, the DNA profile that was developed is not complete. It is not a complete enough profile for investigators to be allowed by law to run it through criminal databases or use genetic genealogy to identify the killer. The only option investigators have is to directly compare it to samples taken from suspects they are able to identify. All of the men known to have been close to Nikki, including Kenny Hale, have been tested and eliminated as a contributor of the DNA. There were no signs of forced entry into Nikki's house. Investigators do not believe she would have opened her door to someone she did not know in the middle of the night, since no one known to be associated with her has been a match to the DNA. Investigators theorized that the killer was known by Nikki well enough for her to open her door for them, but not so well that he could be identified by the other people in her life. When he was contacted by different detectives over the years, Kenny Hale did not feel particularly optimistic about their efforts. When Detective Garland took over the case and contacted him, however, Kenny felt differently. Detective Garland has looked into numerous potential avenues of investigation in the case in recent years. He has conducted further DNA testing, investigated known serial killers, and even explored the possibility of having Nikki's son, Marcus, who was just 7 months old at the time of the murders, undergo hypnosis. He believes he is close to solving the case if he can just track down the right individual to compare the DNA from the crime scene to. Nikki's son, Marcus, is now in his 30s and lives in Mississippi, where his father, Nikki's fiancé at the time of her murder, also lives. Kenny Hale still struggles with the loss of his daughter and with remembering the brutal end to her young life. He has albums full of pictures he took of her, but sometimes he cannot look through them in their entirety because he becomes too emotional. While his relationship with Nikki did not work out, he still describes her as a beautiful person who did not deserve her violent death and hopes to get justice for her as well. As painful as revisiting the murders is for him, he will not give up on his daughter and her mother or on finally getting answers in their case. It gets kinda hard to go back and relive the story, he told the Daily Beast in 2022. But as long as I got air in my lungs and am able to tell their story, I'll keep telling their story until I can't tell it no more. Montana was home to 21-year-old Jordan Lynn Graham and 24-year-old Cody Johnson. Cody, originally from San Jose, California, grew up with his mother Sherry after his parents' divorce. As her only child, Cody and Sherry were extremely close. When Sherry decided to leave California for a fresh start, they moved to Montana. Friends remarked that Cody had a knack for making people laugh. He was known for his exuberant personality and often played the class clown to lift others' spirits. Cody enjoyed the outdoors, including fishing, shooting, and taking long walks. One of his greatest passions was working on cars and racing them with his friends. After school, Cody secured a job building custom vehicles, a role he loved. His boss and close friend, Cameron, helped him thrive in his career. He told people, however, that he felt something was missing. He wanted to settle down, meet someone, and raise a family in Montana. His single life would soon change when, in 2011, Cody met Jordan Graham. Jordan was quite shy, more reserved and introverted than Cody, only opening up if she was really comfortable around someone. When she did, people said she shared the same sense of humor as Cody, and the pair seemed a great match. Jordan also shared his love of the outdoors and traveling, and they spent a lot of time hiking and touring scenic routes in the area. One of the couple's favorite places to visit was the over 700 miles of trails that made up the famous Glacier National Park. Jordan also loved children, often helping to babysit her friends' kids, and she too was keen to have children of her own. Jordan came from a religious household and spoke a lot about how strict this could be. There were a lot of rules, one of which was no sex before marriage. Cody told people he was infatuated with Jordan, and before long, he would be attending church with her. Friends and family said their relationship appeared to be going from strength to strength. Cody was besotted and told his mother he had found the person he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. So, after a year of dating, in December 2012, when Jordan made a very special announcement on social media, no one was surprised. After 6 months of planning, on June 29, 2013, Jordan and Cody were married. The wedding seemed to reflect the young couple perfectly. A magical ceremony held outdoors, with the pair even writing their own song for them to have for their first dance. Jordan sobbed uncontrollably as she walked down the aisle and wasn't really making eye contact with Cody, looking at the ground a lot instead. But for someone who was more introverted, this wasn't a surprise. Cody, however, was beaming. There were plenty of gushing speeches about the couple. It was a beautiful event for them both. After the big day was over, the couple moved into their first home and opted for doing this up and decorating with their time off, rather than traveling anywhere together for their honeymoon. Cody had booked a week off work and was due back on the July 8th, Sunday, July 7th, 2013. Cody had made plans with his father-in-law, Stephen, to go kayaking that day, but he later contacted him and canceled the plans, saying Jordan had a surprise for him. Another friend of Cody's also said he had called off a round of golf for the exact same reason. Cody and Jordan then went to an afternoon church service, before going to the lake and then heading back to church. After this, they had a late dinner at Dairy Queen with some friends before leaving together. July 8th, 6 a.m. Cody's week off had come to an end, and he was due to start work early. But the usually prompt and hardworking Cody failed to show up. Because of how out of character this was, Cody's boss Cameron decided to go to the couple's house, and, panicked, he forced his way inside. There was no one there, and there was no sign of a break-in or anything being overtly or obviously wrong. Nothing inside was broken or smashed, and nothing seemed to be missing. He then went into the garage to see if Cody's car was there. He found Cody's phone. Just the same as most people, Cody was never without his phone, and Cameron quickly filed a missing persons report. The first person detectives needed a statement from was Cody's wife. Jordan told officers that on the way back from Dairy Queen, Cody had answered the phone and ended up having a 30-minute conversation. She didn't know who was on the end of the phone, but Cody seemed visibly agitated. When they pulled up to the house, Jordan realized her phone was about to die and she had left her charger at work. She got back in the car and headed to her workplace, leaving Cody in the garage. She then got a text from Cody saying he was going to take a drive with someone. She arrived back at the house to see him leaving in a dark-colored car that had Washington state license plates. But Jordan said this wasn't unusual. As everyone knew, Cody loved cars, and she said he would often take off with a new group of friends to race, sometimes very late into the evening. Jordan said she hadn't wanted to report him missing in case he came back and was angry at her for overreacting. Cody and Jordan's friends quickly rallied around and started trying to access his social media accounts, hoping to work out where he might have gone. Authorities obtained Cody's call logs and discovered that a Washington number had made a call to Cody around the time Jordan had said. Given the fact that Jordan remembered seeing Washington license plates, this was a good lead. The number was linked to a man named Jose. Jose told police he rang Cody to talk to him about some tools he had borrowed from him. There was nothing unusual about the conversation and nothing Jose could remember as being off about Cody at the time. Jose was cleared thanks to a strong alibi, and police concluded, although strange, especially given the Washington license plates, it was simply just an odd coincidence. The search for Cody began to widen. People were out all hours of the day and night, and his friends and family were trying everything they could think of to find him. It had now been 3 days since Cody was last seen, and police weren't getting any further. Jordan was in and out of the station answering various questions which weren't being met with the same answers twice. One day, Jordan arrived back at the police station with her mother, armed with an email she had just received. The email was from someone calling themselves Carman Tony. It was short and blunt. It read, "Hi Jordan, my name is Tony. "There is no bother in looking for Cody anymore. He is gone. Call off the search." The email went on to say that Cody went off with some friends for a hike that night and had fallen off the cliff. Everyone was shaken, and they hoped it was either not true or, if true, Cody could still be saved. Jordan said she did in fact know a Tony S. that worked with Cody. Authorities found him and asked him to come in for an interview. Tony hadn't seen or spoken to Cody in a while, and he had never used an email linked with Carman Tony. He was happy to hand over his phone and computer records. And with this, police were back at square one again. They subpoenaed Google in regards to the email as well as Cody and Jordan's phones to gather any data. Given the contents of the email pointing towards Cody falling off the cliff, Jordan gathered up her own search party and they headed up into the rocky terrain of Glacier National Park. Some of the roads on the drive up were narrow, winding, and long, and given the span of the park, people knew they could be searching for weeks, if he was even there. A day later, they went back again, but this time Jordan seemed to be on a mission. They drove past many roads and cliff edges, any of which Cody could have been on or near, and carried on up, getting higher and higher. Jordan was telling people she wanted to go to a specific spot. She told her friends that it was a place he had wanted to see before he died, and the Holy Spirit was leading her there. At one point, Jordan abruptly stopped the car. She leaped out near what is called the Loop Trail. Off of the track, there was a steep drop down past many sharp rocks and trees. It was undoubtedly treacherous as the drop was a terrifying 300 feet. Despite this, Jordan climbed over the wall and headed for the edge. She leaned over and shouted to everyone behind that she could see someone at the bottom in the water. She then started shouting over and over that she knew it was Cody. The search party alerted the park rangers, but due to the time of night and how dangerous it was to try and get down, they had to wait until morning. At 8 a.m. on July 12th, the search for Cody Johnson came to a tragic end. On the way down the cliff, using ropes tied to trees, they found a blue trainer that matched the one Cody was wearing the day he went missing. They finally reached the bottom, and lying face down in the shallow water near the waterfall was Cody Johnson. Near to his body was a small piece of black cloth, and he wasn't wearing his wedding ring. As news began to spread that he had been found, his friends and family couldn't fathom why on earth he would have been up there at night in the first place. His friend Eddie said even though Cody loved seeing the sights and going on long walks up there, he wouldn't have ever steered off the path and climbed over the walls in the dark. Cody wasn't actually very good with heights. He never went too high up and always stuck to the lower-level tourist routes with retaining walls around them. Eddie said once he couldn't get up a ladder to fit a new light bulb for his mother because of the height. Shortly after Cody was found, Jordan posted a photo on Instagram from their wedding day. The caption read, "Miss you so much, Cody. Not a day will go by where I don't think about you. You will live on in my heart forever. I know you're in a better place now looking down on me. You're my angel. Love you with all my heart and soul. See you again one day." It had now been 2 weeks and police were still searching for answers regarding the mystery email. While they did this, Cody was laid to rest. At his funeral, Jordan sat through most of it on her phone, showing no emotion. It could have been her way of processing and compartmentalizing the situation, but her maid of honor and best friend, Kimberly, thought this was just too strange. After this, Kimberly promptly walked into the police station and started to shine a whole new light on the investigation. She asked to talk to officers about some interesting texts she had gotten off of Jordan in the weeks leading up to and just after the wedding. Despite their perfect nuptials, she recalled many a conversation with Jordan about how she seemed far more excited about planning the wedding rather than the thought of being married to Cody, more excited to be a bride than a wife. Others said that Cody, put simply, was always far more in love with Jordan than she ever was with him. Kimberly recounted a couple of times Jordan had asked her if she thought she was making the right decision. Other people would back this up and say Jordan was very nervous about the wedding night and wondered if she was making a mistake in committing to Cody. The night after the wedding, Jordan texts Kimberly saying, "I don't know if all this was the right thing to do. So much happened last night. I just don't know." Kimberly replied, "Last night at the wedding or last night in the room?" Jordan said, "Being married and after the wedding." "What happened after?" Kimberly asked. "I'd rather talk about what happened, not text about it. But as the days progressed, the texts continued, using the "my period started" spiel tonight. I freaking hope it works, because if I'm forced to do something, I'm gonna freak out. On the night of July 7th, as the pair were leaving Dairy Queen after dinner, Kimberly received another text from Jordan, this time saying she wanted to talk to Cody about how she was really feeling. Kimberly said she would send positivity and prayers to them both, and just before 9 p.m., Jordan replied and said, "But dead serious. If you don't hear from me at all again tonight, something happened." Later that night, Jordan would turn up on Kimberly's doorstep, telling her the conversation hadn't gone down well. She said Cody got really angry, and she ended up leaving the house to go to her brother's. This, along with her seemingly knowing exactly where to find Cody, and the comment she had made about him wanting to see that place before he died, as well as her not being the one to report him missing, was all too odd. Kimberly said it was a sickening feeling, but she knew in her gut that Jordan was somehow responsible for Cody's death. She just didn't know how or why. Detectives already had their suspicions, given how many times her stories had changed, and Kimberly's proof of text messages only solidified their thoughts. After this, the IP address from the email came back. It actually pointed towards the email being set up and used in her stepfather's home. And despite Jordan saying they were both separate the night as he had driven off, phone records confirmed this was a lie. Both phones were together in Glacier National Park at 9:17 p.m. Using this time frame, they managed to gather CCTV to the entrance of the park, which showed Cody's car and both of them inside. Police were no longer looking at the elusive car man Tony, they were now looking straight at Jordan Graham. Jordan was asked to come into the station and tell them the full truth about what had happened that night. She eventually broke down and told them she had started to talk to Cody about how she felt, and it escalated into an argument. Cody said if this was how she felt, they should annul the marriage. Jordan, however, was worried about her reputation if they divorced a mere 8 days after the wedding. How and why this came to be remains unclear, but they both got in the car and drove to the park where they set off on a trail. At one point, Jordan even mentioned a blindfold. She said they both walked over a bridge and then climbed over the retaining wall where the argument continued. Despite her claiming it to be in the heat of the moment and essentially an accident, officers weren't convinced. Why wouldn't she have run for help rather than running to her stepfather's computer to fake an email? Why would Cody have climbed over the edge in the first place when he was afraid of going near the cliff edge? Even for someone that wasn't afraid of heights, to go over a safety wall in the pitch black above a 300-foot drop wearing a blindfold seems an inconceivable thought. Jordan Lynn Graham was arrested and charged with second-degree murder and making false statements. But this was soon upped. As the trial began, her defense team went straight in, fighting for a second-degree murder conviction, claiming it was an accident in the midst of a heated argument. But the prosecution felt strongly that this was far more than an accident. They said the fact she had told him she had a surprise for him, and he was found near something that may have been used as a blindfold, showed this was very much premeditated. This, along with the phone records, the fake email, the failure to alert anyone or report him missing, and the lack of emotion after the fact added more to their case that she didn't care about what she had done, had planned it, and hoped to pin it on someone else. On December 12, 2013, just 4 days after her trial began, Jordan's defense team made an announcement. Jordan Graham's plea deal gave her 30 years in federal prison with no chance of parole any earlier. In exchange for her plea, prosecutors agreed to drop the charge of premeditated first-degree murder, as well as one count of making a false statement to authorities. After her sentencing, the judge said, "There's only one person in this room that knows what happened, and I don't think she's been entirely truthful." Jordan filed a motion to withdraw her plea on March 26, 2014, but this motion was denied. For those that Cody left behind, they still struggle with how on earth things got to such a point. They say as brokenhearted as he would have been to end the marriage, he would have absolutely walked away if it meant she was happy, because her being happy was the most important thing to him. His affectionate, animated, and vivacious personality is missed dearly by everyone that knew and loved him. For Sherry, the pain of losing her only child and still never knowing why haunts her. Cody's best friend said, "He did so much for everybody. I just didn't realize how much he did for me until he was gone." Friday, April 19, 1991, marked the beginning of a slightly extended weekend for 12-year-old David Hibbs. It was an early dismissal day at school, so he got off the bus and reached his home on the 1200 block of Spencer Drive in the Croydon section of Bristol Township, Pennsylvania, around 1:05 p.m. David had received his report card that day and was eager to share the news of making the honor roll with his mother. However, upon arrival, he found smoke pouring out of the windows of the house. Panicked, he realized his mother was inside because her car was parked in the driveway. He ran to the door to get inside to help her, but he could not make it past the flames and heavy smoke filling his family's kitchen. He then ran outside and began hysterically screaming for someone to help his mother. He got the attention of a neighbor who was outside doing yard work, and they called for help. Waiting for firefighters to arrive, the neighbor and a concrete worker, who had been working nearby, tried to get inside the home, but they could not make it past the smoke either. David told them that his mother might have been taking a nap in her bedroom, so they broke the window in that room. But when they looked inside, she was not in the room. Half a dozen neighbors came to help as well, using their garden hoses to try to contain the fire. Tragically, David's mother, 36-year-old Joy Hibbs, was inside the house. Her charred body was discovered in David's bedroom. Authorities initially assumed she had been killed in what they believed to be an accidental fire. However, it was determined that 3 fires, one in the hallway, one in the kitchen, and one in the bedroom where Joy had been found, had been set deliberately. The autopsy performed on Joy's body the day after her death showed that she had been murdered. There were no signs of smoke inhalation in her lungs, meaning she was dead before the fire started. She had been stabbed in the chest and neck 5 times, beaten badly enough that she had broken ribs, and strangled, most likely with the computer cord found wrapped around her body. The fire appeared to have been set to destroy evidence in the murder. Joy was originally from Central Florida and kept her southern charm even after she moved north. She loved to spend time outdoors fishing and gardening. She and her husband, Charlie, celebrated their 18th wedding anniversary, 6 days before she was killed. The couple had 2 children, and Joy was a devoted and loving mother. Her daughter Angie, who was 16 years old at the time of the murder, would later describe her mother as her best friend. Joy worked as a medical assistant and was highly regarded by everyone in her community. Joy's husband, Charlie, was investigated for involvement in the case, but ultimately cleared of suspicion. He was at a job site in Northeast Philadelphia at the time of the murder. He voluntarily underwent a polygraph examination, which he passed and did everything police asked of him. He was devastated by the loss of his wife. "I don't believe in God anymore," he told the Philadelphia Inquirer 2 months after the murder. "If there was a God, this wouldn't have happened. She never hurt anyone in her life. She had me on a diet and not smoking. Now I die tomorrow, and I don't care. It doesn't bother me. I'm sick to my stomach all the time." Joy had no known enemies, and authorities had little physical evidence to go on as most of the house had been charred by the fire and then covered in water during the efforts to extinguish it. Investigators therefore looked into Joy's movements on the day she was killed. 2 days a week, including Fridays, the doctor's office where Joy worked opened late and stayed open late. She would normally work from 8 a.m. until 2:30 p.m., but on Fridays, she did not have to be at work until 2 p.m., so she had the morning free for her other responsibilities. After getting her children off to school, Joy had gone to the bank to cash her paycheck. Following her death, the contents of her purse were found strewn about her kitchen, and her wallet was found in her couch with no cash in it, indicating that robbery may have been a potential motive for the crime. She left the bank at 9:53 a.m. She then went to the grocery store with a receipt showing that she checked out at 10:54 a.m. Back at home, Joy was visited by a local minister and a member of his congregation. Joy had expressed interest in joining their church after attending services there on Easter. The 2 visitors were questioned and eliminated as suspects. They were witnessed leaving the home around 11:45. Police, therefore, placed the time of Joy's death as sometime between 11:50 a.m. and 12:50 p.m. During this hour-long window of time, multiple witnesses reported seeing one of the few major clues investigators had: a blue Chevrolet Monte Carlo, seen parked haphazardly outside of Joy's house. The car had not only been notable because of how poorly it had been parked and the problems it created for drivers on the street, but also because the Hibbs home was at the center of a T-shaped intersection, making the front of their house an unsafe place to park. A potential suspect who had a vehicle. Joy and her husband had started occasionally using marijuana in the late 1980s. Charlie usually obtained the small amount of marijuana they required from a coworker, but Joy had begun purchasing from a former neighbor, a man who drove a blue Monte Carlo. He had recently sold her what turned out to be just stems and seeds. Joy had tried to return it and get her money back, but he had refused. This individual refused to take a polygraph examination, later stating that his attorney had advised him against it because he suffered from carpal tunnel syndrome and nerve damage in his shoulder, which he said could interfere with the results of the test. Police also believed this individual had an alibi for the time of the murder and that a disagreement over a transaction valued at somewhere between $20 and 40 cents was not a sufficient motive for murder. While he was considered a person of interest, there was not enough evidence to charge him with Joy's murder. Joy's family, however, was not convinced of his innocence. In 2014, Joy's son David stated that he believed police knew who the killer was but had botched the murder reward in the case. The 3 decades that had passed since the murder had not eroded his desire to get justice for his wife. "This is something you can't put behind you. You just learn to live with it," he told the Philadelphia Inquirer. "I'm just reaching out for help. She was a good woman, and she never harmed anyone in her life. She didn't deserve what happened, and neither did my children." His son David and a family friend, who wished to remain anonymous, also contributed money, doubling the reward to $50,000 just a year later. An arrest would finally be made in Joy's case. On May 25, 2022, Bucks County District Attorney Matthew Weintraub announced the arrest of 56-year-old Robert Francis Atkins of Fairless Hills, Pennsylvania. He was charged with murder of the first degree, murder of the second degree, 2 counts of arson, and 2 counts of robbery in connection to Joy's murder. Atkins was the person of interest who drove the blue Monte Carlo and had sold Joy marijuana. He had long been suspected by Joy's family. Following the announcement of the reward in May of 2021 and the media coverage it generated, Joy's case was reopened and eventually sent to a grand jury in January of 2022. One of the witnesses called to testify before the grand jury was April Atkins, the ex-wife of Robert Atkins. She had been contacted by police in connection to Joy's murder in 2014 but told them at the time that she did not know anything about it. Then in September of 2016, following the deaths of her mother, niece, and significant other, she knew that there was something she needed to make right, and she went to the Bristol Township Police on her own accord. April told authorities that on the day Joy was murdered, her husband had come home with blood all over his clothes. He told her that he had stabbed someone and set their house on fire. He also ordered her to get their 2 young children ready because they were taking an unplanned weekend trip to the Poconos. He threw his clothes into the washing machine and took a shower. April did not want to leave town because she was due to go to work at 3 p.m. Her job required employees to give them at least 2 hours notice for calling out for a shift if they wanted to use paid leave. Records from her employer confirmed that she had called out at 2:15 on April 19, 1991. The family had already lost their house, 2 doors down from the Hibbs family home, to foreclosure and was living paycheck to paycheck, so going without a day's pay was a major problem. But Atkins insisted that they go. They quickly packed and began driving to a motel in the Poconos. According to April, her husband drove incredibly fast and aggressively the entire drive. When she woke up during that night at the motel, her husband was not there. The next day, he had new sneakers. While they were staying at the motel, he had April dress the kids to take a walk, and they went out to an area behind the motel. Her husband had a bag with him when they started. He disappeared for a while and returned without the bag. The family stayed at the motel from late Friday afternoon until Sunday. Police went to the motel and confirmed that the family was there and accepted the timeline Atkins provided, placing their arrival in the early afternoon, making him appear to have an alibi for the time of Joy's murder, when in fact he did not. Records from the motel show that the family did not actually check in until 4:53 p.m. Atkins also claimed that the trip had been planned for weeks, a claim his then-wife's last-minute call to work to say she wasn't coming in that day seems to dispute. April stated that she had not come forward because she feared for her life. Robert Atkins had been physically and sexually abusive towards her since she was a teenager. He used drugs, including methamphetamines and steroids, which increased his violent behavior. However, his drug use also led to him becoming a criminal informant with police. He was very close with several officers. April had called police after some of the incidents of domestic violence during their marriage, but believed her husband's relationship with the responding department prevented action from being taken against him. While she and Robert were divorced by the time investigators came to see her in 2014, she was still afraid of him and had to be in regular contact with him because their youngest child, their son Gabriel, was still a minor. Gabriel was living with him at the time as well, potentially putting him in harm's way. April cooperated with police by making a recorded phone call to her ex-husband in December of 2021. Portions of this call were played for the grand jury. She told him a fabricated story about how authorities had arrived at her home to question her about Joy's murder, and that as she was making the call, they were interviewing her roommate, to whom April had admitted her ex-husband's involvement in the murder. He told her in a variety of ways to stop talking to police and that the phone was probably being tapped. He also said that he had explained everything to their son Gabriel. Gabriel also testified before the grand jury. The possibility that his father was involved in a murder and the recent attention his family was getting from law enforcement had taken a major toll on Gabriel's emotional state. He tearfully admitted on the stand that while talking about the case with his father had stated that I might have done it and stuff happened. Joy's son David also testified before the grand jury. He stated that his mother had confided in him that she had gotten into an argument about marijuana with Atkins just weeks before she was killed. He testified that Atkins told his mother, "I will blow up your house and I will kill you." After hearing testimony over a period of several months, the grand jury recommended that Atkins be charged on May 19, 2022. At his arraignment on May 25th, Atkins was denied bail and he has been remanded to the Bucks County Correctional Facility. A preliminary hearing in the case is scheduled for June 8th. While Joy's family was not shocked by the identity of the man arrested for her murder, they were grateful he is finally being charged in the case. Following the arrest, they released a statement remembering Joy and thanking the members of the DA's office and the police department, whose recent work had led to Atkins being charged for the murder. The statement also read, "The immense grief and suffering our family has endured over the last 3 decades will never disappear. For 31 years, our family has been haunted by this tragic loss, knowing without a doubt that Robert Atkins was the perpetrator. Our family has waited 31 years for justice to prevail." Melissa Tremblay was born on March 1st, 1977. Her father was not very involved in her life, and she was her mother's only child. According to her friends, Melissa had a fun and bubbly personality. She was a very tough little girl with a spunky attitude. She already had her own distinct personal style and preferred to have her hair feathered and her clothes to have a funky edge to them. Melissa was featured in a local news story, looking for a big sister through the secretary when she grew up because she liked to type. In 1988, Melissa and her mother lived in Salem, New Hampshire, and Melissa was a 6th grade student at the Lancaster School. September 11th that year was a Sunday, and that day, 11-year-old Melissa traveled to Lawrence, Massachusetts, a 20-minute drive away from her home, with her mother and her mother's boyfriend. At some point, while the adults were socializing at the LaSalle Social Club on Andover Street, Melissa left the building to go play in the neighborhoods surrounding the club. Melissa was last seen in the late afternoon by a railroad worker and a pizza delivery man. Melissa's mother and her boyfriend frantically looked for Melissa throughout the neighborhoods around the social club but could not find her. They called police to report Melissa missing at 9 p.m. Melissa would not be found until the following day, September 12, 1988. Her body was found in the Old Boston 1988. Her body was found in the Old Boston and Main Railway Yard near Andover Street and South Broadway. Not far from the social club, she had been stabbed to death. After she was killed, her body had been run over by a train, amputating her killer. Tommy Linsells, who rode rail lines and worked at carnivals, was considered as a potential suspect, but ultimately cleared of involvement in Melissa's murder. Melissa's mother passed away without ever learning who killed her daughter. Melissa's friend, Andrea Ganley, was just 7 years old at the time of Melissa's murder. Losing her friend in such a brutal way at such a young age played a major part in shaping the person she would grow up to be. As an adult, Andrea pressed for police to remain focused on the case and used social media to raise awareness about Melissa and her murder. According to authorities, the social media campaign was helpful as it resulted in new tips being called in. Melissa's case was formally reopened in 2014 and investigated by assistant district attorneys and state police detectives assigned to the Essex District Attorney's Office Cold Case Unit. It would take several more years of work before an arrest was finally made in Melissa's case. On April 27, 2022, nearly 34 years after Melissa was killed, Essex District Attorney Jonathan Blodgett announced that the night before, 74-year-old Marvin C. McClendon Jr. of Bremen, Alabama had been arrested as a fugitive from justice. He was considered a fugitive because of an arrest warrant that had been issued for him that day for Melissa's murder. McClendon was a retired corrections officer, previously employed by the Massachusetts Department of Corrections, working for the department on 3 different occasions, between 1970 and 2002. At the time of Melissa's murder, he was living in Chelmsford, Massachusetts, but he had several ties to the city of Lawrence. At the time, he was moonlighting as a carpenter and worked at several locations in Lawrence. He furthermore was known to frequent several establishments there, including the Seventh-day Adventist Church on Salem Street. He also drove a van that matched the description of one witnesses had seen Melissa near on the day she was killed. At the time of the press conference, McClendon was in the custody of the Cullman County Sheriff's Office pending his arraignment. A judge in Massachusetts had already ruled that he would be held without bond. McClendon ultimately waived rendition and was sent back to Massachusetts instead of first appearing in an Alabama court. McClendon first briefly appeared in court in Massachusetts on May 13th. He will next be in court on June 17th for a dangerousness hearing when it will be determined if he should continue to be held in custody. According to DA Blodgett, McClendon had been a person of interest in the case for some time. He further stated that evidence found on Melissa's body was instrumental in identifying McClendon as her killer. However, due to the ongoing criminal case, he could not elaborate on the nature of that evidence at the time of McClendon's arrest. On the day of McClendon's first court appearance, prosecutors stated that DNA evidence had been found on Melissa's body when the case was reopened in 2014. Advanced DNA analysis eventually led them to McClendon's family. They took DNA samples from several members of the family, including Marvin. The rest of his family lives in Alabama, and he is the only known member of the family to have ever been in Massachusetts. He is also the only known member of his family who is left-handed, and analysis of Melissa's fatal wound showed that it had been inflicted by someone who was left-handed. Essex Victim Advocates has been in contact with the surviving members of Melissa's extended family. The family issued a statement on April 29th, which read, in part, "We would like to thank the police who have worked so hard over the years to make sure justice was found." Stephanie Isaacson was born on August 12, 1974, in Lincoln, Nebraska. Her father's military career led her family to relocate frequently during her early years. In 1985, John was stationed at Nellis Air Force Base, prompting the family to move to Las Vegas, Nevada. Stephanie and her father shared a close bond and spent much of their time together, united by their mutual love for the outdoors. The pair enjoyed going hunting, boating, and camping together, and they rode both horses and motorcycles. They both received their scuba diving certification at Lake Mead. Stephanie's bond with her father was so close that when her parents divorced, she decided to live primarily with him, while her younger sister primarily stayed with their mother. Stephanie still regularly saw her mother and sister and had a good relationship with them. John Isaacson worked nights as a staff sergeant at the Air Force Base, so he did not see his 14-year-old daughter leave their apartment for school on June 1, 1989. At that time, he and Stephanie were less than a month away from moving to Spain for his next Air Force assignment. Stephanie's normal routine was to leave around 6:30 in the morning walking to El Dorado High School via a shortcut through an empty desert field. That morning, she never arrived at school. The school did not call her father when she did not report to class. Her choir teacher was concerned when Stephanie did not eat lunch with her friends in her classroom that day. The group always spent their lunch break together and referred to themselves as the little team. The teacher was surprised to not see Stephanie that day, as it was unusual for her to miss school. Stephanie's father, John, grew concerned when his daughter did not arrive home from school that afternoon at her normal time. He called the school and finally learned that she had never made it to school that day. John then began calling some of Stephanie's friends, none of whom had any idea where she was. John's next call was to the police to report Stephanie missing. John then went to the Air Force Base with some of his friends to pick up horses from the base's stables. They rode the horses around the small area of desert between the high school and the apartment that Stephanie could have walked through that day. During their search, one of John's friends spotted a trail of school books in a lot half a mile from the apartment building where the Isaacsons lived. John confirmed that the books belonged to his daughter, and they notified authorities of what they had found. A massive air and ground search was carried out in the area. Around 11 o'clock that night, the search came to an end. Stephanie's body was discovered approximately 25 yards off of a path she would walk to and from school. A police dog found her amongst the brush, hidden under a discarded piece of orange carpet. When Stephanie's body was found, the black shirt she had been wearing had been pulled up and her jeans had pulled down. Her hair was in disarray, and her left breast had been mutilated. During her autopsy, it was determined that she had been sexually assaulted. It appeared that Stephanie had been abruptly attacked by surprise as she walked to school before being dragged off the path, leaving behind the trail of her books and other belongings. Her autopsy found that she had suffered severe blunt force trauma injuries and had died as the result of strangulation. 2 memorial services were held for Stephanie, one in Las Vegas and one in Nebraska, where she was buried. Police followed up on what few potential leads they had early on in the investigation. Local residents reported seeing a vehicle parked in the area the day of Stephanie's murder, but they provided different descriptions of what it looked like. As years went on without an arrest, investigators traveled all over the United States to follow up on potential leads and possible suspects. In 1998, the evidence from Stephanie's case was re-examined in hopes of locating DNA evidence. The effort was unsuccessful. Despite ongoing advances in forensic science, a match to the DNA could not be found in the ensuing years. In 2020, a $5,000 donation was made to Othram, a Texas-based laboratory specializing in advanced DNA technology. The donation was made to help solve a cold case, with the donor specifying that the case in question must be one from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. Stephanie's case was selected by the department's cold case unit not only because of her young age at the time of her murder and the brutality of the crime, but also because there was very little DNA evidence available for analysis, meaning investigators had to rely on Othram's advanced techniques to process the small sample. Othram used their forensic-grade genome sequencing to create a genealogical profile from the provided sample. Genealogists began constructing a family tree and provided leads to the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. From there, the department identified 2 potential suspects. A DNA profile was on file for one of them, and in 2021, comparison of it to the sample from Stephanie's shirt showed that he was a match. In identifying the contributor of the DNA, Othram set the record for the smallest amount of DNA used to build a genealogical profile and solve a case. Police in Las Vegas had provided them with 0.12 nanograms of DNA, or approximately 15 human cells. For comparison, commercial DNA sites like Ancestry.com or 23andMe use at least 750 nanograms of DNA to construct their customers' DNA profiles. The smallest amount of DNA Othram had previously been able to use was in August of 2020, when they used 1/5 of a nanogram, or approximately 20 cells, to identify Rodney Johnson, previously only known as the Lake Stickney John Doe. On July 21, 2021, 32 years after Stephanie was killed, authorities announced that her killer had been identified as Darren Roy Marchand. Unfortunately, he could not be arrested or tried for Stephanie's murder. The DNA sample on file that had confirmed that he was a match to the DNA from the crime scene had been taken following his suicide in 1995. That son of a bitch got me twice. Once when he killed my daughter, and the other one when I didn't get the opportunity to look him in the eye, Stephanie's father, John, told the Las Vegas Review-Journal after Marchand was identified. In March of 1986, when he was just 20 years old, Marchand had been charged with the murder of 24-year-old Nanette Vandenberg. Her nude body was found in the bathtub of her Las Vegas apartment. Marchand's fingerprints had been found near her body, and he had been with her at a casino just before her death. Marchand denied involvement in the murder, stating that he had left Nanette alive at her apartment before going home to go to sleep. The murder charge against Marchand did progress to a preliminary hearing, but the case was dismissed after 2 days of testimony after it was ruled that the fingerprint evidence was not enough to charge him with Nanette's murder. After DNA tied Marchand to Stephanie's murder, authorities compared his DNA profile to DNA evidence from Nanette's murder and found it to be a match. Marchand got married in January of 1987, less than a year after Nanette was murdered. At the time of Stephanie's murder in June of 1989, he and his wife had a 2-year-old daughter and were expecting a son. In January of 1989, Marchand was charged with 5 counts of open and gross lewdness. Each count was in relation to a different woman to whom Marchand publicly exposed himself. That April, Marchand pleaded guilty to one of the counts in exchange for the other 4 being dropped. He was awaiting sentencing when Stephanie was killed. In August, he was sentenced to a maximum of 1 year of probation, which he was released from after just 9 months. Marchand and his wife divorced in 1990. He committed suicide in the Las Vegas area just weeks before his 30th birthday in 1995. When Martin's identification was first announced, the individual who provided the funds for the testing in Stephanie's case was initially only identified as an anonymous donor. He was subsequently identified as entrepreneur and philanthropist Justin Wu. After moving to Las Vegas from Los Angeles, he established the nonprofit Vegas Helps. He contacted Othram about expanding his efforts to benefit the Las Vegas community by solving cold cases after taking a personal interest in advanced forensic DNA testing. In November of 2021, another donation from Mr. Wu led to the identification of Johnny Blake Peterson as the killer of 16-year-old Kim Bryant. Kim witnessing on January 26, 1979. She had last been seen in the parking lot of a fast food restaurant near her high school. Her body was located a month later, and it was determined that her killer had sexually assaulted her. Othram tied Peterson to the murder using DNA taken from Kim's body. Just days later, Peterson was tied to another decades-old case. His DNA was also a match to DNA collected from the body of Diana Hansen. 22-year-old Diana was a college student who had returned home for winter break at the end of 1983. She went out for a run around 4:30 p.m. on December 30th and never returned home. Her body was later found on Spring Mountain Road, west of South Buffalo Drive, in Las Vegas. She had been sexually assaulted. Peterson died in 1993, so he could not be charged with either of the murders. Mr. Wu has formed the Las Vegas Justice League to provide further support and funding to the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. As of late 2021, the League is looking into assisting with at least 8 other cold cases in the Las Vegas area. While the solving of Stephanie's case was appreciated by her family, it, of course, did not diminish the pain caused by her loss. It's good to have some closure, but there is no justice for Stephanie at all. Stephanie's mother wrote in a statement read at the press conference announcing Marchand's identification, "We will never have complete closure because nothing will ever bring my daughter back to us." Crystalline Schartzer was born in 1980 to Doug and Mary Lynn Schartzer. Although details of her early years are sparse, her life changed dramatically when she met Damian Michael Arguello at age 16. They were introduced on a blind date arranged by mutual friends in Fenton in 1996. At that time, Crystalline was focused on her education, attending college with the goal of becoming a nurse, while Damian worked sporadically helping his uncle with carpet installation. On the day they first met, Crystal and Damian experienced an undeniable connection, leading them to tie the knot in 1999. Shortly after their wedding, they welcomed 2 children, Damian Jr. and Celeste, and soon their family was complete when the 3rd baby boy, Raven, came into their lives. However, the happiness in their lives began to slowly dissipate. While their family appeared to be functioning well on the surface, there were underlying issues that deeply troubled Crystal's family. Following a decline in their relationship, Crystal decided to live with her children at her parents' home in the city of Holly, Colorado. From June 2003, communication between Crystal and Damien dwindled, and their once strong bond began to crumble. The situation eventually escalated to the brink of divorce, and by mid-2004, the divorce proceedings were nearing completion. However, on August 3, 2004, an unexpected turn occurred when Damien visited Crystal's home late in the night and assisted her in packing for a move back to Aurora, Colorado. The next morning, when Crystal's parents woke up, they discovered that Crystal and the children had disappeared. A week later, Crystal reached out to her father, informing him that she was in Aurora and intended to live with Damien. However, her parents were deeply unhappy about this decision. The couple, along with their children, began their fresh start in Colorado, and for weeks life seemed normal. However, after 5 months on January 18, 2005, the house that once held hope became a living hell for the mother of 3. In the early hours of January 18th, Crystal and Damien's first 2 children, Damien Jr. and Celeste, were around 6 years old at the time, sought refuge in their neighbor's home. The neighbor, whose name remained undisclosed, was taken aback by the children's evident fear and unease. They confided in him that Crystal and Damien were involved in a heated argument. Concerned, he promptly went to Damien's home to investigate the situation. On his way, the neighbor noticed Damien driving away in Crystal's car. He entered the house hoping to find Crystal and her 16-month-old baby, Raven, but the scene that greeted him was beyond his worst nightmares. Both mother and child were lying lifeless in a pool of blood, having been stabbed and strangled to death in one of the home's bedrooms. Horrified at what he had seen, he called 911. Upon arrival, the police swiftly began investigating the crime scene. Realizing that Damien had fled, they promptly initiated a search to trace Damien's whereabouts. Thankfully, after just a few hours, they managed to apprehend 27-year-old Damien Michael Arguello, who was found in Crystal's car only a few miles away from the scene of the crime. After his arrest, Damien was taken into custody, and the interrogation commenced. During the interrogation, the interrogators had numerous questions for Damien. However, he initially struggled to share, choking up as he visualized the horrific events that had transpired just a however. What surprised the interrogators the most was Damien's complete lack of remorse. Even though he initially seemed like he was regretting it, it didn't take much time for his emotions to completely change. He answered their questions as if the heinous act was inconsequential, showing no emotions or remorse. All he seemed to want was a cigarette, seemingly indifferent to the gravity of the crime he had committed. Indeed, it appeared that all Damien wanted was to smoke, possibly to cope with or mask any feelings of guilt, if he had any at all. As he smoked, Damien finally mustered the courage to ask the question. As the interrogators held hope that he might be coming back to his senses, Damien finally confessed. For the first time, he exhibited emotions, but unfortunately, they were not the emotions one would hope to see. Despite their efforts, the interrogation failed to yield the confession they sought. A confession that Damien had stabbed his wife, an innocent baby. It seemed that guilt was finally catching up with Damien. The news of Crystal and his son's death, relayed by someone else, appeared to bring him back to reality. Slowly but surely, Damien began to accept the horrifying truth and the weight of his actions. Following Damien's confession to the crime, he began cooperating with the investigators regarding the case. The police successfully recovered the murder weapon, a knife used in the tragic incident. However, how they recovered it was never mentioned. According to law enforcement, both Crystal Arguello and her son lost their lives due to multiple stab wounds. Moreover, the evidence revealed a tragic truth. It appeared that Crystal had bravely attempted to protect her baby during the horrifying ordeal. The murder, which involved both strangling and stabbing, took a gruesome 10 to 20 minutes. It was later clarified that Damien first attempted to strangle Crystal. As Crystal lay on the floor, she valiantly shielded her baby with her body, but tragically, they both succumbed to the fatal stabbings. During an April 2005 preliminary hearing, a detective revealed a disturbing motive behind the horrific crime. Damien was allegedly upset as he suspected that he might not be the father of the baby. Moreover, he admitted to smoking crack cocaine before the tragic incident, which played a role in his erratic and violent behavior. On July 15, 2005, in Adams County Court, Damien entered a guilty plea to 2 counts of first-degree murder. By pleading guilty, he avoided a trial and also the possibility of facing the death penalty. However, Damien will spend the rest of his life at the Colorado State Penitentiary with no possibility of parole. Damien's sentencing took place on September 16, 2005. Damien Michael Arguello, 27, received 2 life sentences for murdering his wife and their 16-month-old son. He will spend the remainder of his life at the Colorado State Penitentiary with no chance of parole. Crystal's parents, Doug and Mary Lynn Chartzer, were present to confront the man who had taken their daughter and grandson from them. Doug Chartzer expressed his anguish, stating that Damien showed no genuine remorse for his actions. While Damien appeared to cry, it seemed more like he was feeling sorry for himself rather than truly remorseful for the horrific deeds he had committed. Since their daughter's tragic death, the Chartres took on the responsibility of raising Crystal's children, Damien Jr. and Celeste. Despite the children's memories of that fateful night, the Chartreusers handled the matter delicately and refrained from pushing them to talk about it. They ensured that the children received ongoing counseling to help them cope with the trauma they had experienced. Chartreuse vividly remembered the conversation he had with his daughter and grandson on January 18, 2005, the day of the murder. Everything seemed normal during their talk, and little did he know it would be their last. In that poignant telephone conversation, Chartzer's heart was warmed as he heard his 16-month-old grandson, Raven, call him Papa for the first time, cherishing a precious memory of their bond that would forever remain etched in his heart. Adams County District Attorney Don Quick, having served as a prosecutor for 18 years, expressed that this was the most horrific crime he had ever encountered. Some of the evidence was withheld until the conclusion of the case. But he now wants the Charterers to find solace in knowing that their daughter's final moments were spent heroically trying to protect her baby. Quick was shocked to discover that the baby had been intentionally stabbed rather than accidentally. Finding comfort in the closure of the legal proceedings, Crystal's parents felt a slight sense of justice, knowing that Damien will forever be behind bars. So do you think the Chartzer family got the justice they sought, or do you think Damien should have been sentenced to death? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.